All
Going
right.
going along. How you doing, Lucky?
Doing good. Asif.
Well,
Who are we welcoming today? Is it Mike? Welcome, Mike.
Thank you. Thank you.
yeah, Lucky. When you have an episode that you have to
Yeah.
record and you kind of want to, get your mindset right. We just did that, right? Well, Mike set us up to say like, this is the level, the depth of understanding you have to have, and that's what Mike just did. Warmed us up to the depth of so many things, and sometimes you think about it on surface level, you think like, it's easy, I got it. But then there's Mike. And it's like, no, let me tell you a little bit more. And you're gonna lose your mind because it's a rabbit hole going down. So welcome to AyAy, Mike.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Welcome, Mike.
So
Ay, 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 ay.
that's the
There's the
channel I was
coffee.
talking about.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, like I said, welcome, Mike. And you're right. There's things that you think about, and then there's people that know the way things work, and so that was a brief. We discussed a little bit prior to the podcast, kind of the areas of discussion, and wow, there's a lot of good stuff here today, and we really appreciate you today, Mike. Stepping in and having discussion with us today.
Thank you, Lucky. So, should I do a little bit of intro on my
Yeah, yeah,
my
Please,
please.
background,
Mike.
maybe?
Please
So,
do.
I'm a veteran. I served in the Marine Corps, 4.5 years on active duty, and then when I separated, wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, and I actually went into sales, um, business to business sales, which I'm glad I did. That was on advice of one of my mentors back then. And through that, I also got exposed to how different companies ran their procurement processes. And the company I was working for had a consulting division. So I went into that and I started doing consulting. This was in the late 90s. Very fortunate. The internet starts to take off. The company I was working for was one of the leaders in going to B2B electronically, and so I managed some of those projects for that company, and then got hired by IBM to help companies implement different procurement systems. Spent 5 years at IBM. Typically, the projects were relatively long, 6 months to a year. Worked with Caterpillar, Disney, the IRS, Saks Fifth Avenue, Target. It was great
Yeah.
exposure to different companies to see their different cultures, and different business models. It was really fascinating. I loved it. It was 100% travel though, and I was married. I still am married. Had 3 young boys, and just the travel became a little bit hard on my sons. They were wondering why Dad had to travel so much and other dads didn't. So one of the things, I'd gone back and gotten my MBA after I was in the military, and sitting in classes. Everybody wants to be the next Steve Jobs, and come up with the next iPhone. What I always was just fascinated by was someone who bought a company and turned it around. And so did a lot of research. Ended up purchasing a company here in San Diego. It was in the vehicle repossession industry. Did that for 5 years. Initially it was incredibly successful, and then the financial crisis hit and had a significant impact on that. From there, I did 2 years as sort of continuing entrepreneur, but anyways, about 10 years ago, ended up starting with SAP, primarily around procurement, and I was working with customers after they bought our software. I was making sure that they're using it to its ultimate potential. And about the last 4 years, I've been in our partner organization, working with SAP's partners. Some are software partners, excuse me, like DocuSign, people are probably familiar with.
Oh, okay.
Others are service partners like Deloitte, IBM, but mid and smaller companies internationally. We have about 20,000 different partners that somehow touch SAP customers. And so my current role, I just try and create pipeline sales opportunities for those partners. So that's my background. And then also, I think one of the things we're going to discuss today is I'm on the board and been volunteering with Vet CTAP. Vet CTAP stands for Veteran Career Transition Assistance Program. It's a all volunteer program run out of Southern California, where I'm located. But because of COVID, we can now offer it on. We offer it online, and so we've had international students. But we typically target people who've been in the military about 10 years. So we're typically dealing with officers and senior staff NCOs and we coach them on the transition. We work with them on resume writing, interviewing, networking. It's a 6-week course. I'm really proud of the work that we do. I wish something like that existed when I got
Mhm.
out, but I see it has a tremendous impact on the veterans. So that's my career and me in a nutshell.
Mm, it's amazing. Yeah, I think the experience that you've had, since you got out of the military. I think I want to go back to what I said earlier, right? On the surface level, you think about it, there's so much under it, right? The depth of it, you just don't know yet. You're just scratching the surface at that point. So I have a bias, Mike, right? I have a bias that, if you're a military veteran, you should look into the AI, not just for developing AI or designing an AI, but to have a career that has an impacted by AI, right? That has some sort of a useful use case for AI, right? So I have a bias towards that because I'm like, I got out of the military, I'm able to do that. And what I've seen most of the time is, hey, if you're a military guy and you're getting out, you should get into that leadership position that has something to do with project management or something or the other, right? Not necessarily some, just specific depth of some career field, but just go for project management. You're good at it because you're organizing people and you're organizing tasks and you're a very trained organizer, right? Because most military guys are known for that. But when you said sales, I started scratching my head. I was like, I never thought about that because military guys are trained to be very bold, very outgoing, and very extrovert, in my opinion. Right? You just have to be. You're forced to do that. You have to because you're out in a field with a lot of guys, and you're trying to get the mission done. And sales is no different than that, right? You're organizing and you're out in the field, following your mission task, right? So tell us a little bit about that because that sales part and the transition out of military, like tell us a little bit more about that. Like,
Sure. So,
how do you
so
how do
going
you
back,
capture
yeah,
that?
when I got out, again, I was an infantry officer. There was not a huge demand in the civilian community for deploying the tow missile and knowing, the how to deploy different weapon systems. And so one of the things I did, I put together a list. It was actually at the advice of my father, put together a list of 10 people and went and asked them for career advice. And one of the people I met with, he was actually my former Little League coach, but he had worked for different hedge funds who had bought companies, would bring him in as the CEO, and basically he would get that company optimized, and then they would sell it, 3 or 4 years later, usually at a multiple of what they bought it for. And so he'd worked internationally, Europe, Australia, U.S., had done this over and over again. And one of the things that he communicated to me, he said, all these companies, he always hired the best engineers and would pay them very, very well. And that was one of the keys to success. But he said, looking at each and every company, the highest paid individuals, by trade were the sales reps because they were bringing in revenue. And he talked to me about business to business selling, which is much more
Mhm.
different than consumer to business. I was thinking consumer to business, the classic used car salesman. And he said, business to business, it's a longer term relationship. And it's literally you're building a relationship. And I think the reason veterans do well in it is one of the things you're taught in the military is immediately is accountability, and you never ever make excuses. And I know that sounds every veteran would probably shake their head and go, "Yeah, so what?" But that's actually a rare commodity in today's
Mm,
society. I mean, you see it all the time. People, "Hey, it
right,
wasn't my fault," or
right.
whatever. And so as a sales rep, when the customer was having an issue or a question, just 100% honesty and taking accountability for it was immediately just it establishes trust, where they're going to trust you over your competitor. And more than one time in my career, I've had a situation where I've lost a deal. It's gone to a competitor, and then 6 months later, they come back and they purchase from us. They say, "Yeah, that guy overpromised that it was all vapor what they were selling. We're gonna come back and use you guys." So even if it doesn't pay off initially, it pays off in the long
Mhm.
run. So I think veterans have that instilled in them, and then also, being organized. If you're going to do something, and if these are the next tasks in the sales cycle, uh, uh, ensuring that those are accomplished, so you look competent and as prepared as possible. And then the last thing I'll say, one of the great things about being in the military, I graduated from college, and 2 years later, I was briefing general officers on real world, situations. There was a coup in the Philippines when I was on active duty, and we responded to that, and I had to go in. And so, getting that experience and then having to go in and talk to a CEO of a company, it I showed respect, and it wasn't like I was cocky, but
Right.
I'd already been through an experience where, I knew, not to stutter. It just was so much less pressure talking to a CEO about
Mhm.
something that wasn't life and death compared to that. And so I think again, the military people have that experience where they're going to be able to communicate
Mhm.
clearly uh, uh, in those situations.
Wow. Yeah, that's a very good way to put it, right?
No, you're absolutely right. I've seen that more now. I've worked with veterans my whole life. I've never served, and I really thank you for your service. I've
Thanks.
worked in
Yeah,
in the
thank you.
VA, or I've worked for the federal government my whole life since I think I was 19. I've been working with federal agencies, and I've worked with the VA now 25 years, and everyone I work with is a veteran, you know, and you see that now more than clearer now than any other time where, hiring people, um, trying to bring people on. It's not that I'm biased towards veterans, even though I am, but then you just kind of look it up. You just kind of put up,
Yeah.
okay, you do the resume, then you do the hard look, and then you interview people, and you can really see the difference. People that are individuals that come out of the any branch. I don't care what branch it is.
Right.
You know, they already know what is expected of them. There's no false expectation. Okay, what's expected here? Do I have to do remote or I just no, no, no. The expectation is to work, and then after that, everything else is just kind of extra. But
Right.
the idea is to come in. You have veterans that are willing to relocate for a job. People nowadays, they barely wanna work remote, you know? They're like, "Is it a remote job? Oh, I'm sorry, I want a remote job, that's what I'm looking for, I wanna work at home in my pajamas." And that may be the case, but that's right up front, that's the expectation. And the reality is, you want people that are ready to come into at least to a situation where they're strong, physically, but mentally they know that there's a job, we got to complete a task, a goal, something has to be completed. And that's hard to find. Those people that are actively trying to make themselves better, learn, and then really try to complete something, and with individuals now, that's hard to find, and veterans, they come prepared for the workforce, and for me, it's an easy pick, and not so much pick but decision. Hey, am I gonna look at these guys, these group of guys? I want these guys. And I hear it all the time from executive leadership. Oh, we gotta dip into the we gotta call universities, colleges, and reach out to these guys. These guys, they know what they're doing because 'cause they're coming out of college. And I wanted to laugh. I was like, "No, those
Uh,
are the most greenhorn." I hate to say, I'm from Texas, wet behind the ear. They're not ready. "Oh, but they're driving technology." No, they're not. They don't know anything. Maybe if you're into politics, maybe you want to have a few guys in leadership, and those guys that you want to bring out of, maybe, but I'm not sure if that's even a good decision. I like people again that have real world experience, and just like you said, you've talked to people when it was life and death,
yeah.
where something mattered. Now, talking to this guy on a by and by on a Tuesday about making a purchase, all of a sudden isn't your, that's not a pressure situation to you.
Yeah.
That is just getting the job done,
I think
and
that
that's hard to find.
I think that rang a bell with me, Lucky, because like when you say like somebody from college or something, I mean, there's nothing against anybody that's educated,
No.
highly educated, but the experience part of it, as you mentioned, I think that's the differentiator. Like, so if somebody's
Mhm.
hiring for whatever job you're hiring for, I remember it was so easy for me to just pick up and leave. Not necessarily that I was trained for it, but that's the
Mhm.
reality of the military guys in their military career.
Yeah.
You are ready with your A bag and duffel bag to leave at moment's notice. So you always are not just trained in these topics that we can categorize, but that's the reality of any military guy. You have a home, and that home is just a temporary base for you. right? You have to pick up and leave in a moment's notice. And when I first got out of the military, I was looking for jobs. I turned down a lot of the jobs. I did that intentionally because I realized, like, well, I could do something more. I could do something better, right? I could challenge myself even further. And when I did, and when I took the first job, I literally just went and visited the place, which was hours and hours away from where I was living. Next day, literally picked up my stuff and moved over there. Right, you just find an apartment, just move in, and it had no furnitures in it, just a bunch of duffel bags. Right. So I think that's something that you do not get to experience, no matter what
Mhm.
position you put yourself in. Right. Nothing about like comparing this, comparing that. Like, no, that's just the nature of the military lifestyle. So I think that really works very well when it comes to say, like, how do you take responsibility? How are you accountable for somebody else? How
Mhm.
are you accountable for yourself? How do you execute a mission, and how do you know that how that impacts the whole ecosystem? I think it's just something. Even if you train for it, you never actually execute it in real life. And I think military guys just has it. That's part of their curriculum. I would say. You know.
One of the things, that we see just with veterans in general is, a good example is those who go into the trades. So electrician, carpenter, welder, things like that. They show up. They're, and my brother is a civil engineer, work, for a large construction company. When they hire veterans, says a lot of the common problems disappear. One, they show up on time because they were trained to do that. They show up prepared. If they're responsible for a toolkit, every single tool is there. It's organized, it's clean, it's serviceable. They know that. Another big thing is they don't take safety for granted. If the company says these are the safety procedures and all that, the military guys, they know, they automatically follow it. And so the biggest thing though from like a lot of the trades is the guy showing up today, is he prepared, and is he acting in a safe manner? And they say when they hire veterans, those three move off the board. One of the things
Yeah.
too, on a slightly different topic that we stress with vet CTAP, again, we're working with people who've been in for 10 years. Almost all of them have leadership experience, and that's why they've been in 10 years. They did their initial time in, and then they've been promoted. And leadership is one of those qualities where, I look at the two key things to leadership. Is one is being able to motivate other people, but everyone who comes out of the military from a leadership position has had the opportunity to work where I had to do more with less. I didn't have enough time, I didn't have enough people, it was raining, whatever, but I accomplished the mission. And so if you can position yourself in front of a company saying I have these skill sets to do that, even if, to your point, Lucky, even if I don't have a college degree or training, and this is what Amazon does, says I can train you to 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 do that. That's the easy part. You doing these other things and being a good leader, because being a good leader has that multiplier effect. And we've all worked for good leaders and bad leaders, and that's one great thing about the military too. It's the best leadership lab in the world. You
Yeah.
can't pay people more. You can't incentivize them by saying, "Hey, here's $200," and yelling lasts, a day. And so you learn how to motivate people. And so having those leadership skills is a huge force multiplier. And the companies that recognize that, they know I can train the person, this veteran, to do this, and then they're going to have that multiplier effect. But the other thing, a good leader does, and like you mentioned, you didn't serve in the military, but everyone recognize this, is if you think about the best people you work for, is that good leaders challenge and take care of their peers. It's not about them. I see you shaking your head like, yeah.
Mhm.
And that's what these people, the reason, again, they did well in the military is if you're taking care of peers, we've all had that boss we want to overwork for. We want to, because we have that loyalty and they're such a good leader. And so the people, that's one of the benefits of that CTAP is you know, we get to work with the cream of the crop, and it's just them expressing that and communicating that as they go into the civilian market, because everybody recognizes the power of a good leader. And from a corporate point of view, retention and turnover is a huge. If you have 20% turnover, it's incredibly expensive. You have to bring someone new, go through the whole hiring process, get them up to speed, and then maybe they weren't a good fit. But people don't leave companies because they don't like their job. It's because they don't like their boss. Usually, is the thing. So again, if you can bring in good leaders, and the military people tend to have that because they've worked in this, that one, they get leadership training, and then two, they've had the experience of looking at good leaders and bad leaders. It's like a huge lab, for leadership.
Yeah, I think when you say CTAPs, it brings back a lot of the memories because the TAPS program that I went through it 3 times and learned different topics, different time because it was taught by different people. And one thing I always remember on the last taps, which really turned me around, is that said like, why would I ever hire you? Right? Like, why would I ever hire you? So you mentioned earlier that you don't have $200 actually to give them. You cannot yell one time less to make somebody incentivized. But as a person who's in the leadership position, he understands that you have to bring your value in the commercial side of things, right? As in the military, yeah, okay, military just paid you and then you did your job and you did it within a crowd, right? But when you're an individual getting hired for a commercial side, why would I hire you? What are you going to do for me? What it is that you're going to do to help me make more money, right?
Right.
So your mission is no longer saving lives. It's about how much money are you going to put into the quarterly reports, right? So I think that kind of tuned me out. And I said like, well, I don't know. I don't know how I'm going to make somebody money. So I jumped into the entrepreneurial side of things. I was like, well, if I have to make somebody money, why don't I make that money for myself? Right. So, you can be a project manager, you can go work for somebody, you can do sales, right? But entrepreneurial spirit, I think it kicked off in me because first of all, it just happened naturally that I was supposed to do 20, but I ended up doing less, one day short of 10 years. And I did that intentionally because if you do 10 years in one day, that means you're over the hump, right? So I stayed behind the hump. And I said, well, that's a teaching moment. That's a learning moment for me to say, well, if I don't know how I'm gonna make somebody money, maybe I should figure out how to make my money for myself. Right. So one man team and one man's courage to go after, entrepreneurial side of things. And I think all your experience and CTAPs and all your engagement with military veterans, all the engagement outside of military community, over the years, you have taught me many, many valuable lessons about business and being an entrepreneur and engaging in entrepreneur. So entrepreneurship. Sorry, that's what I meant. So what's your take on military veterans and getting into the entrepreneurial side of things? And given that there's so much AI buzz going on, so much technological buzz, no matter what kind of business you open, the technology has to be involved, be it AI or not. Give us some insights into that. Like, I think,
Yeah, I
what's
think there's a
your
few
thought
points.
process?
Is one, looking at my career, a lot of it, I mentioned I worked for IBM and I worked for SAP, which is one of the largest software companies. I am not a coder. So, a lot of times veterans could be put off by technology, thinking that, well, I need, very specific skills. I need to know the nuts and bolts of that technology inside out. And where my value, if I look at my career, is I've been good in front of a whiteboard where the technical people come in and say, this database is going to do this, it's going to talk to this database and do this, da da da, and they'll go through the technical side of it. And where I've had success is talking to the executives that say, and it's sort of, okay, the so what? Okay, it does that, but so what? What's the business impact? And literally, this is the business impact, but building a business case for it. If you invest $200,000, $2.5 million, whatever the cost is, this is what the system's going to do, and this is where it's going to generate a return. Always driven by what's the ROI, what's the return on investment. You put this
Mhm.
money is what money is that going to save me? What extra sales is that going to generate? But what's the bottom line? What's the business case on that? So you don't, but to back up, point number one is you don't have to be a coder or a computer engineer to get into technology. Point number two, I'm older than the two of you, but you can look back and like I got involved when the internet was taking off, right? And
Mhm.
if people look back and could have said, okay, I wish I was involved with that, earlier, emerging technologies. And so AI is definitely, an emerging technology. I mean, I don't think that's even up for debate, but it's still early days. And so just saying, even though I may not become the subject matter expert, but getting involved in an industry, it's like if you were studying computer science back in the 80s, you're almost assured of a job and a long career because that is a long time booming industry, and AI is gonna have that. And then the you touched on, I can't remember if it was just you just said this, but project management is one of the keys around AI too. And I
Mhm.
mentioned I worked at IBM, worked on these long projects. Two project managers stick out to me. They're the best project managers. The application and the technology we were putting in, they knew very, very little about it.
Mm.
But
Right.
what they were good is was managing the team. I mean, every single day we would have a 15-minute. We weren't allowed to sit, and no one wanted to sit. But we had a 15-minute meeting. It was, what did you do in the last 24 hours? What are you doing the next 24 hours? And what issues? Who do you need to coordinate with? What impediments are you seeing? And so, but that wasn't the only thing he did. But that was just his leadership style. It reminds me, if you ever seen the movie Apollo 13, where they, running out of oxygen, they take all the stuff and throw it in the engineers and say, "Figure it out, dummies." That was his. In a way, he was just coordinating it. He didn't know, as we started talking about technical stuff, it'd be like, "You got to break it down for me. I'm not a
Mm.
technical guy," but did a phenomenal job. And also, half his job was managing the team. The other thing was communicating with the client, and again, that accountability. Instead of, hey, we hit a road bump and making excuses, he'd go in, he'd present the problem, say these are the actions, he'd take ownership of it.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about one, but there were two people who, again, they had very little technical knowledge, and they just really impressed me. They were phenomenal project managers. So again, I think there's opportunities for vets to get very close to AI in different projects, but
Mhm.
and use those leadership and project management skills that they've definitely been trained for in the military. And the thing is, I mean, a successful project manager you will never want for a job. It doesn't matter if it's in IT. You can go from IT to almost anything if you have those project management skills, and that's why there's certification, because it's not, you're getting certification on a technology, you're getting certified as a project manager because those skills are very transferable.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
And the side of the project management, I think there's a whole lot of AI use cases. So if project management was to be your choice of career, you don't necessarily have to know about an AI, how to develop it and raise it from the infancy, right? But if you're utilizing AI, you will see a lot of the project management redundancy, as in tracking, early detection, understanding, the anomalies of where your project is going wrong. There's lots of AI features I think that is coming down the pipeline, specifically on project document side of things. Right, this document that is a charter for next 6 months of your project. You one that you have to keep looking at, but it doesn't update yourself. It's a dead document. Okay? It's the one that doesn't do anything unless you write on it, right? So this live document that comes to play in the project management for, say, for purposes of, like, just having a Zoom call and capturing notes from that Zoom call and putting that into a live document, so that way you are able to capture the requirements differently. Like, what's the delta between the requirement that was put out a month ago versus the requirement that has changed overnight, right? So how do you capture the delta for that? How do you adjust your requirements as you go? And emails that are sending back and forth, how do you capture that in a live document so you're able to capture all this information? And all of a sudden, at the end of the project lifecycle, you're able to create multiple documents based on the stakeholders' need, right? So if it's going out to the legal team, how do you send it out to the legal team? If it's going out to the user specifically for tech specs or functional specs, how do you create this text and functional specs using that one single live document, right? Uh, and how do you do that throughout the project's lifecycle, right? So I think there's just this AI, like you said earlier, the emerging technology. Back in those days, when he said, "How would internet impact you?" You will have to really sit there and persuade people. Say, like, "Well, internet is this big. This is how small it is. This is how big it will be, and these are the infrastructure that tells you why it will be that big." And I think AI is going through that same exact scenario, which tells me that I'm aging to a point that I am seeing an emergent technology that I used to learn about. Now all of a sudden I'm seeing one happening right in front of my eyes.
Yeah.
And that to me is like a feel good moment to say, like, wow, I'm going through an emergent technology at one point in my life. Previously, it was just a history. It's just kind of hearing about, like, the wall in Europe falling down. And they're like, I
Yep.
wasn't there. I just heard about, like,
Right.
historical perspective. Doesn't impact me. All of a sudden, I'm going through this emerging technology, and I'm just like, wow. In my lifetime, I probably will see two or three more emerging technology, even after AI is kind of died down and has taken over the spectrum of use cases, right? So, um, question that I probably will ask you is that, like, when you look at process and you look at process mining, and from your experience of process mining, That's that sort of goes with the project management I just mentioned, right? The project management and AI, but the process mining will also have an AI. And earlier we started off the conversation about like, hey, scratching the surface, how deep you go, and how when do you stop? You don't know, right? Because this is a rabbit's hole that you have
Right.
to go down, and that's what process mining is. And if you look at the AI use cases, that's what we're that's what we're looking into today. Like, is that process mining, and how does AI incorporate with that? Tell us a little bit more about that. I think process
Yeah. So
mining you have a lot of experience in.
a little bit of my experience with process mining is I in my current role at SAP, but not my I'm in my current company at SAP, but in a previous role, I managed one of our external partners who is really one of the leaders in process mining. That relationship has ended, and then SAP has purchased a company called Signavio, which does process mining. Again, what happens under the hood and the algorithms and the
Mhm.
AI and all that. I'm not necessarily familiar with that, but the whiteboard version, I'm pretty well spoken on. And one of the things that the process mining companies, when they go and they talk to the market, the most common example they use is procurement, and because almost everybody, if you're an engineer, you understand that. So they talk about, hey, company wants to purchase something. They start with a requisition. That requisition require approval, might require approval from your supervisor, from different departments. It gets routed electronically, but once it's approved, it becomes a purchase order, which gets sent to the vendor. Vendor gets the purchase order, may uh, respond with a ship notice. Hey, we think we're going to ship it in this, but then they'll eventually ship the product. Company will receive it, and you get an invoice. And most people can visually picture that process. And as you go in and talk to companies, they'll say, yeah, that's our key process, and they'll say, yeah, we probably use that 90% of the time. And maybe we have 3 or 4 different deviations. Like sometimes someone will use a procurement card. They're not, they're out, or it's a low dollar thing, and they'll just buy it, using a procurement card. So that's an exception. And then we have these other things, but maybe we have a total of 8 different processes. When companies put in the process mining software, what most of them see is, yes, you have this preferred path of requisition PO that I described, and maybe that's happening 60% of the time at best. The other time, it's not. It's deviant, and you don't have a handful of processes. You have thousands of them, and they start to see where there are exceptions. And uh, one of the things, one of the misnomers is that a lot of the companies think, okay, these are things that I control that are happening within my four walls. And a lot of times when they put in the software and they start to drill down on it, they'll see we're having issues where the process isn't being followed in this region. So it's not across the entire company, but it's happening in one geographic region, could be the problem. And you know, then you start to investigate. But it also could be with a specific commodity. Hey, this type of commodity, it might be something that can, copper wiring, where the price fluctuates constantly because copper is a commodity, or with other things. But then a lot of times they drill down and they'll actually see vendors, specific vendors. Hey, these guys are doing everything, but they're billing us consistently at different and incorrect prices. And when we try and reconcile the invoice and all that, but so what they see stuff outside of their four walls that may be causing problems and costing them money internally. One of the best examples of, you never know what you're going to get when you put in process mining. I was at a conference, and one of the companies that had put it up, uh, or put in process mining, they wanted to, make their process more efficient. They load the software. Took about 3 weeks to get all the data in and process it. But the very first thing they noticed was they thought they were paying all of their invoices on time in order to capture discounts. If you're familiar with a term like 210 net 30, it means if you pay in 10 days, you get a 2% discount, but otherwise you got to pay it 30 days. They thought they were capturing all those discounts, but through process mining, it found the needle in the haystack, where their system was saying, yes, pay on like day 9, but then another program in their system was saying, take all the invoices for a given week and pay them on Friday. And so that second one, they were missing the discounts.
Mhm.
They literally spent 20 minutes toggling, changing that, and they saved $600,000 in discounts. It more than paid. The software was under $100,000, even in their time The whole project was budgeted $150,000. Within 15 minutes, they saved $600,000, and that was the low-hanging fruit. And then where AI comes in too with the process mining, it not only it'll find the bottlenecks and the pain points and where it's costing you money, and then it'll give you the recommendation, and it'll even take you into the system and tell you on this screen you can toggle this, and it'll correct that problem. And it's
Wow.
using AI in order to do that. A lot of the part before is more algorithms. There is machine learning involved with categorizing everything, but
Mhm.
specifically with the recommendations on how to correct the problems. A lot of that is driven by AI. So it's very, very powerful. And like I said, you can, that was using procurement and how, okay, now I can pay invoices and save $600,000. But you can also look at, risk and exposure where people aren't using the system and they're buying things that they shouldn't be buying. And maybe there's a risk, if you're United Airlines, you don't want someone buying a part for an aircraft that isn't FAA approved from an FAA approved source. And I'm not saying United Airlines would ever do that, but there are mission critical things, and that's why you put in processes. And so when people are deviating from those processes and policies, you want to be aware of it. So process mining is a very powerful tool. It can save you money, but you can also look at, okay, how am I interacting with my customers when they have an issue? I'm thinking they make one phone call to our customer care and it's resolved. But through process mining, you can see, nope, okay, maybe that happens 20% of the time, but there are these persistent problems. And a lot of times it's just a systems issue, right? That you can go in and say, okay, we're coding this problem wrong and treating it this way. If we
Mhm.
if we just recognize initially what it was, we could solve it instead of that the customer having to make 3 or 4 calls on it. And so you get much higher customer satisfaction, which every company wants, but also with you get 3 or 4 less calls to your call service center and eating up that time. So it's one of those things again, until you put it in, every company is different. You're not quite sure what you're going to find, but most companies see, hey, we have thousands of processes and something in procurement where we thought we had one, and there's very low hanging fruit. We can make minor changes that are gonna that are gonna capture significant value.
I know Lucky is like, I'm sticking to cybersecurity. There's
But
less process mining in cybersecurity.
No, it makes the thing is, one thing about working in government is, I'm really good at being a nerd, and they figured that out real quick, and they said, "You know what? What else can you do, Lucky?" And, I've been detailed out to strange things like designing buildings, and designing continuity of operations, coop sites. And he's absolutely right. There's things that within processes within the data, there's a devil in the data, and you have to find out what that devil is, and just looking through, and then processes is one way, but again, looking at data and then looking at how you can improve processes, there's always going to be a cost savings. If you pay attention, if you look, there'll be an opportunity for cost savings. I've been part of stuff like that a little bit, but remove more on the technology side. I'm the one kind of pushing the keyboard, and others are coming up with the ideas. But I've been involved with tabletop discussions where they are discussing how we can improve processes. And you're absolutely right. There's things you don't know until you know, and
right.
going down the rabbit hole.
The other thing, if you think of a process too, a lot of times, there's been
Hmm.
books written on this. Is that if it was just making widgets at a factory, right? There's this process, and then there'll be a bottleneck, right?
Hmm.
Maybe where this workstation can only produce this many units, and so everything downstream of it is slowed up. Well, when I change and I remove that bottleneck, now it's flowing faster, but maybe upstream now is I recognize a new bottleneck and all that, and
Hmm.
that's where process mining. The way I used to describe it too, is you could get 200 people and all the data and Microsoft Excel, or I mean, Excel's a low level program, but you could get these very and have it do the analysis, but it's going to give you a one-time snapshot of what your problem is. And as soon as you remove that one bottleneck, that have to run the calculations again. Process mining, it's looking at real-time data. And so when I change that one thing and I change that bottleneck, it'll expose the next one, which is a
Hmm.
good thing. And so you can make these iterative improvements. And with a lot of companies, you know, if you're efficient, you're looking at, okay, how can I improve this by not 1%, but by 1/10,000th of a percent, And because on volume that'll actually be very very significant. You're continually refining it. And so one of the things about process mining is it's real time. It's once you set it up, it's looking at historical data, but then it's monitoring daily. Uh, and so you make one change, and then it'll suggest the next change too. So it's very very powerful. There's no way you could do it manually.
Yeah.
You have to have a process mining system that's reading the data real time.
Yeah, lucky. I think one thing that reminds me of is that we've been very efficient in adding more master data and pushing through lots of transactional data, right? So, like you code, you label the items that you procure, or items that you sell, or items that you engage with, and each of them has a cost, be it a cost center or just be the cost associated with it. And then by the time you do your end year calculation of all these procurement and inventories and your sales, and then how much it costs and all of these, you get a good number, and you fall for that satisfactory number, because hey, we set out to do 5 million this year, we've done 6. you know Now there's a trap of we've done 6 million, that's great, more than 1 million more than what we expected, right? So now the conversation is like, what could have we could have done better, right? So I think me and Mike was talking about the fact that there's auditors at the end of the year that comes out and says like, well, I've audited, and these are the things that we found wrong, and you paid us this much money, and this is how we make it worth your time, because we found you 500,000, but you pay us 100,000. So you could have made 6.5, but you made 6. Well, now you made 6.4 because you paid us $100,000, right? But the funny thing that I found out the other day, that there's an auditor for the auditors. Now they come in and say, "We'll find you more money, but you have to give us a commission off of whatever we find. So if we find you another $100,000, give us a 40% commission, which is $40,000." Just using as an example, and I think that's where AI sort of is a valuable proposition, as in it's like a justified cost to say, how do we incorporate earlier in the year, so that at the end of the year we can see how an AI will be able to reduce that audit cost, right? So, like, say for example, you catch it the first time. Well, last year you guys made $400,000 worth of mistake. This year you make 200,000, and eventually it goes to negative. Like, we didn't make any mistake. Even the auditors that came in to find extra cost or extra income for the percentage value. Now we're not seeing any of that. So first year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year, 5 year later, you're like, well, 5 years and 5 years later, AI is doing absolutely what it set out to do.
Mhm.
That's the process mining that I'm very intrigued with, right? As in, if you did that first, second, third, fourth, fifth year, not a lot of companies are interested in finding a product that says, "I'll prove you right in 5 years." And I completely understand that.
Yeah.
Like, why would you want to buy an AI system that doesn't work right away, right? But I think there's a huge need for these crawlers, right? The business logic mining crawlers, AI crawlers that are able to capture something over time, if not immediately, right? Immediately starts proving itself, but it proves itself to the point that more you feed it, more confidence you have in it. Like, second year it did very well. Third year it didn't even did much better than the second year. I think there's a need for that, but the conversation just doesn't happen that way in a business world, right? It's about, can you show me in quarter one what it is that you can do for me?
Yep.
Quarter two, can you improve better, right? So I
One real
see
quick,
the
one of the things, I mean,
quarters.
we used to talk about with companies is, there's the leading edge companies, right? But the nickname is also the bleeding edge
Leading edge. Yeah.
companies, that right, that so because you're going to learn all the painful lessons.
Right.
And so with some technologies you want to be right behind the leading edge. And I think with AI there's already those, there not only companies like ChatGPT or whatever that are leading that, but also companies and their initiatives to adopt and incorporate AI. And that's what you're asking your customers to do.
Right.
But no matter what, there's going to be a learning curve, right? Of once you jump on that AI train. And so one of the arguments is you want to jump on it now or 2 years from now?
Yeah.
And if you're 2 years behind your competitors, you're going to still have to go up that learning curve, and it might you're going to
Mhm.
avoid the bleeding edge, but potentially. But if you wait too long, and you've seen this with, again, with transformative technologies like the internet, uh, if you look at, no one could have predicted back 20 years ago. Well, people could have, but it's drastically transformed certain industries. Look at, we're talking, I think we touched on it, but the used car industry, right? With
Mhm.
Carvana and other things, people are buying and selling used cars. They're getting credit approval. They're doing everything over the internet or through an app. No one really thought that would be, everybody thought, with a car, people would want to go down, kick
Yeah.
the tires, take it for a test drive, and
Mhm.
also selling it that they, but it's popped up, and it's found a niche within the market. And so with AI again too, I don't think there's some obvious things that people can predict 2 years, but no one's know where it's going to go. So my thing is, if I was talking to customers, you at least want to have your toe in the pool and be on that learning curve, because if you wait too long, and if your competitors don't wait, they're they're going to get literally a competitive advantage. If the story I love, if you look at, Compact and Dell back in the 20s, Dell had a competitive advantage having to do with their inventory. They carried less inventory. So a new chip came out, they only carried, what I read, 3 days of inventory. New chip came out, they could take the old chips, put them in a computer, sell it on special, and within 3 days they got rid of that inventory, and now they're just selling the new computers. Compact had a 47-day inventory on hand.
Mm.
So yeah, when the new chip came out, they very costly to get rid of 47 days. And it within that, when computers came out, the very first computer I bought was a desktop. It was $2,000, and my iPhone does 10 times what it is now. But Michael Dell saw that the whole race is for less expensive, more powerful computers, and figured out that industry. And so, but if you wait, my point is, if you wait and recognize something like that, a trend, you're giving your competitor a competitive advantage that you're not going to be able to play catch up on. And
Yeah.
so same thing with AI. We're not exactly sure where it's going to go, but all companies should probably not only be looking at it, but where they can, maybe starting to adopt it a little bit earlier so that they're on that learning curve. Because I think everybody recognizes it is going to be something transformative, like the internet was to business.
Yeah, great point. The ones that survive and the ones that don't, the Acers and the Compacts and you remember the E-machines? They were the
Yeah.
same
Oh, it
way.
was a company out of Iowa. They had a cow. Actually, I'm located in San Diego. It
Gateway.
was Gateway. Gateway. Yeah,
Gateway.
Gateway,
was
yeah.
another one. Yeah,
Gateway.
yeah.
Gateway,
Big,
same
big,
thing.
big players. Yeah, you mentioned, and just
Mhm.
again,
I never put Iowa and cow together. This is the first time I heard of that. They're out of Iowa and they put a cow on their gateway label. Okay,
am I
that's
right,
Yeah.
Lucky? Though, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah,
It was a cow, wasn't it?
yeah,
Was
it
sort of
was,
their
it
their
the
was.
cow.
logo, and then
Gateway
what
of the
they out
cow.
of?
That's
They
right.
were
Yeah,
definitely out of the Midwest, but I thought
yep.
they were out of Iowa originally. Yeah.
Oh man, that's the first time I made the two and two together. So yeah, I think we was always talking about like Blockbuster and Netflix, right? The ability to understand that you have a hard asset and you have
Mhm.
inventory, and then you have software that provides that inventory for you, right? I think we even talk about like just go into the firewall level. Like people used to talk about like firewall as in buy a server that's a firewall. Now we're talking about firewall that's just a software. You just download it. There's so many ways. The things that are actually in real world that is physical hardware now all of a sudden turning into just software. Like you no longer need to buy a location and install that hardware, right? Um, I think you captured it very well, right? The competitive edge that you will gain by early adopting, leading and bleeding, right? Um, that risk averse, not like earlier, Lucky mentioned, COOP, continuity of operations planning. I think that vulnerability assessment is something to incorporate that AI discussion. Vulnerability assessment used to be that, well, this is the ways you're vulnerable based on the current business models. Well, now start looking at the future of business models. The business model that you don't even have today, and even your competitors don't have. How do you have a business model that works for the future, right? And so you look at a new business model that you don't even know that you're going to be in, and how AI impacts that is part of the conversation that is really, really important, but really, really hard to capture people's imagination. And we know these days of research that some people don't even imagine things. I don't know if you heard about those programmers that just don't have any imagination. So you really have to do a whole lot more to capture their imaginations. Um, yeah, I think Mike, in your experience, what helps for for overcome that hump of, like, how do I convince you how the future is and what's going to work in the future? What do you say to that?
Well, I think part of it is having that no one can accurately predict the future, right, with certainty. But when you see a transformative trend, um, you know, if you're in a leadership position, you have a responsibility to recognize that. And you know, I, again, I'm not saying companies should go all in on AI and bet the farm, but I would be heavily motivated to be a slightly early adopter because I think this technology, the internet sort of had a stop and a start. Everybody, the internet bubble, you know, even people who didn't, weren't professionally involved at that time, have heard that term where the internet at one point, everybody thought it was going to completely replace brick and mortar, and there were all sorts of crazy ideas out there that got very well funded that ended up crashing and burning. And so, and then there was sort of a restart. But now if you look at it, most cars, a lot of not just used cars, but new cars, are bought via the internet. And if you think of all the commerce, if you look at your bank statement, your credit card statement, look at how much you buy as an individual over the internet. So there were starts and stop, but in the end, that technology won out and was transformative, right? I mean, almost every single business, if you're not on the internet or have an app, right? Even the gym I go to, has an app where you can schedule stuff, industries that no one thought of. So if you see something, if you're in a leadership position and you see something transformative, again, I understand the argument you don't want to be on the bleeding edge, right? Because it can be painful and very expensive. But you, with something, I think this is going to accelerate. And I think most people agree it's going to accelerate faster than the internet, where the internet, again, had the bubble, starts and stops and other factors. This is going to, it's so powerful, it's going to take over faster. So if this is transformative, if you agree with that, and it's going to move very quick, do you want to be a slightly early adopter or a slightly later adopter, a laggard? And I think there's a huge argument to be an early adopter and a huge argument against being a laggard, because essentially you're betting, if everybody has a competitor one way or another. And if you're going to be a late adopter, you're betting that your competitor is not going to be an early adopter, because you could be handing over a competitive advantage that again, using the compact case, is almost insurmountable. In that case, and with other companies. So I think that's part of the challenge, and a lot of it too is, again, you don't have to bet the farm, but you should be. I think one of the things with AI is you have to have partners, right? You're not going to do everything on your own. You
Mhm.
have, you're going to bring in specialists, and so starting to build and talk to those specialists and build those relationships and raise your IQ on I think is important.
Mhm.
This reminds me that, when we're talking about the 1 year cycle, 5 year cycle, right, life
Yep.
cycle. What ends up happening with AI specifically is that if you have a competitor and the competitor is making millions just like you are, they're not so much of a threat, right? But once AI kicks in, you start realizing that, well, he's making million, I'm making million, but my operational cost is 800,000, and his operational cost is 200,000 or 300,000 or 400,000, half of mine. So he's taking home 600,000, where I'm taking 200,000 home. But we're in the same level. So he's not a threat yet, not the first year, because you see him making million. He posted out $1 million revenue. He posted out $1 million revenue. Over the second year, he's doing 1.5 million, because he took that much home and he was able to reinvest in his company, and so on and so forth. So when you talk about Compaq and Dell, well, yeah, that 3-day inventory costed this much, but 47 days worth of inventory costed that much. So guess what happened 2, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years down the road? You'll no longer exist, right? well, at least look into the possibility of where can you pivot, right?
Yep.
How do you pivot away from the disruption that will happen or may happen? What I don't want to say it will happen, but it may happen. So if there's a need for you to say, no, not only do I need to scale my business or do something different, how do I pivot completely? And I think that pivot has happened with many companies like Philips. You can look at HP's, that they pivoted in their own ways wherever they could settle, right? They had to find a groove that they can settle into. Even IBM Watson has settled into the medical industry more than just saying, we're going to take over the whole world. They just said, well, we'll take over the medical world at least. So I think there's a need for this conversation, like you said early on, and then that's part of that conversation about vulnerability assessment. How do you capture that vulnerability and say, "This is my risk management portfolio. These are the accepted risks, and these are the steps that I take when the risk is presenting itself at this percentage." Right. So thank you so much for that little glimpse into the world, because there's such a wide understanding of these topics. But for you to get started scratching the surface, I think we can expand on that only, right? Rather than say like, oh, okay, we heard it, 1 hour long conversation, let's forget it. I think it has to be a continued conversation, as in like, we'll start a small, we're going to see the bigger picture eventually. So, Mike, if we were to get in touch with you, or somebody was looking to say like, well, I can't do any business without Mike, because Mike is the guru that we need. How do those people reach out to you?
Sure.
Yeah.
So specifically, if there's veterans out there who want more information on Vet CTAP, you can email me. My email is Plue, my last name Plue at me.com. And that's probably the best way. And if there's anything else, for other someone listening or someone else who wants more information, they can get in touch with me. That's probably the best way.
Yeah, Mike at Plue.com. And
Right. Mike
I
at
think
Plue.com or Plue@me.com.
Mike at
Either one. Yep.
Plue.com. I
Yep.
think one of the things that I always say between me and Lucky is like, we are very supportive of military veteran their career transition. So thank you so much, Mike, for talking about CTAPs. You talked about entrepreneurship, and then we talked about process mining, which ultimately leads into the hardware conversation, which is my topic that I really like to focus on.
Right.
So, Lucky, any departing thoughts?
No, Mike, yeah, thank you for being there. You're a veteran. Thank you for, your service and giving back, myself, we always feel that is our national treasure, and we always give back as much as we can to the
Yep.
veterans. So thank you again for what you do. And again, CTAP and the program, and thank you for all your efforts, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. Good luck, gentlemen.
Ay.
Aye.
Ay, 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 ay. I'm sorry, Mike, were you gonna get in there?
I did. Aye. But not nearly as passionate as the two of you. So
It is Sunday morning.
exactly.
See you guys next week.